Good morning, Bears. Let's start this day off looking at Angela's slideshow. Remember, if you have not opened up Mesopotamia, Canaan geography, you're way behind. I just saw a couple people that were in Zoom yesterday, and I go to look at their slideshow. It's still not open. Remember, it's in History, Courses, right-hand side, Mesopotamia, Canaan geography. Click it. Click My Document. Click Edit Document, and then follow the directions from yesterday. Yesterday gives you the overview of the whole week. Today, we're going to go very specific. We need to start making sure everybody knows how to get a quality CER. So today, in class together, I'm going to give you time. We're going to watch a video. We're going to browse an article, and we're going to write a simple 5-sentence CER. Now, your ability to get a rough draft of this, rough draft, doesn't have to be perfect, by the end of class today, will determine your grade in science, so pay attention. If you get the slide started, barely have anything written down, you will at least have a 2. If you pretty good, got some sentences, but you could have worked better and more efficiently, you'll probably have a 3 for the day. And if you have followed directions, keep up with the pace of the day, you can have a 4 in science. Now that grade can change as the week goes, remember. So very important that we're paying attention today. So let's start with Angela's slideshow. And I'm going to give you time along the way. We will take breaks, and I will have you do some work. When I give you the break, do the work. So the first thing we want to do is let's browse what we should have a slideshow looking at. Look at Angela. She is on track. She has Mesopotamia, which was our first concept. This is the concept. She has a visual support, photograph, picture, artifact, whatever it is. Visual support is the way to think about it. You can learn from visuals. Then she goes to ancient Canaan. She has Yom Kippur. She has scribes. She has cuneiform. She has Tigris River, Euphrates River, ancient irrigation, Sumerians, and finally Mediterranean Sea, Great One, and the Persian Gulf. Now let's go back to the top. On this Mesopotamian slide, some of you will probably have a map. The video we're getting ready to watch and the article that we will browse after will give you a nice map. Today's CER is the only mandatory CER for the week. Remember, it's already Wednesday. If you're doing the map. So we'll talk more about the map later. But if you're going to do a map, basically taking a piece of paper, finding a cool map online of the Fertile Crescent or Mesopotamia map. If you do a detailed map, label some cities, mark the rivers, mark the seas, have a little key, and write a little summary of your map. That replaces every other CER except for today. So everybody's doing today's. How do we start? By doing top slide. Let's go to its slide. Create our top slide. Click this. You click your arrow. Title and body is a classic. And we're going to write the question right now. How does geography impact, let's call it the start, impact civilizations development. Okay, I'm going to make that a little smaller. Whenever you have something that doesn't fit, you can either make your box bigger, but that's already a pretty big box, or you can just shrink your text a little bit. So, everybody, right now, create a slide and write that sentence. I'll give you a couple minutes. Answer a question. We are making a claim. And so what is the claim we're making? We're making a claim. Sentence number 1, let's just go by 1 5-fist essay, will state your claim on or that civilizations do impact development. So you might say something like, today we're going to talk about how geography impacts civilizations' development. Or you might say something like, did you know that civilizations developed in certain geographical regions? And then you could explain what about those regions, which you're going to find out in a minute, caused civilization to develop. So let's go. You got this slide. Everybody should have this slide. I gave you a couple minutes. Now let's go get our information. Before we do, let's think about what we're looking for. The second sentence is going to be something about a specific example of a specific feature that impacts development. So we need to look for something. Do mountains help? Do deserts help? Do rivers help? Do oceans help? Does a food supply help? Does technology help, knowing how to farm? And because the certain areas are better for farming, does that help for civilizations? So look for an example of a specific feature. And then you're going to give evidence or reasoning, and they can kind of go together. Like what the example you gave, how does that? Give a reason. Why does that help civilization? Don't write any of this yet. Your fourth is going to be another example or more specific details of above evidence. So you're making a claim that geography impacts civilization development, and now you're showing specific ways that it does that. And remember, you're going to get all this right now in the video. We're just laying the groundwork. And then your fifth is conclusion. And what does the conclusion do? Wrap up reminding people about your claim, maybe with another piece of evidence. All right. Don't have to worry about writing any of that. Take a break, but I want this in the back of your brain. Listen to the video. Where does it tell us? Does it tell us about how civilization is impacted by geography? And then after this video, we'll come in and we can start filling out our CER in some details. Here we go.
And it's no surprise that agriculture first came about around river valleys, because the rivers would flood, making the soil talk about how 10 to 15,000 years ago, you have the emergence of agriculture, primarily around river valleys. And it's no surprise that agriculture first came about around river valleys, because the rivers would flood, making the soil around them fertile. They would provide fresh water for crops and for the people who would live near them. Later on, the rivers could be useful for transporting things like crops. And so it's not surprising that our first significant civilizations also emerged where the first agriculture emerged. And our first civilizations we'll see in ancient Egypt along the Nile. We will see it in the Indus Valley along the Indus River. We'll see it in China along the Yellow and Yangtze rivers. And we'll also see it in Mesopotamia along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. And what we're going to focus on in this video in particular is Mesopotamia. Now, the word Mesopotamia literally comes from mesos, between, and patamos, I'm probably not pronouncing it right, rivers. So the area between rivers is literally what Mesopotamia is referring to. And it's primarily modern-day Iraq. Now, the reason why this is particularly interesting, and it's called the Cradle of Civilization, is not only is it one of, or perhaps the first place that agriculture developed, it was at the crossroads of many other early civilizations. Notice it's right in between the Indus Valley civilization here, and then the ancient Egyptians, and other civilizations that were emerging in the area. And so it's not surprising that this was a geography that had significant developments in terms of technology, in terms of architecture, in terms of religion, in terms of writing. And the first civilization we believe that emerged in Mesopotamia are the Sumerians. And Sumer and Sumerians, it's most associated with this region right over here of, let me circle it, this region right over here of southern Mesopotamia. And we currently think that this civilization started to emerge around 4000 BCE. You can see it on this timeline here in orange. And they developed things as basic as the wheel. The first wheel that was ever discovered was 3500 BCE in Sumeria. They are famous for their architectural structures. This is a picture here of a ziggurat, which was at the center of many of these Sumerian and, as we'll see, Mesopotamian cities. This would have required an incredible amount of labor to produce. And at the top of these, they had temples to their gods. And their gods, they had a polytheistic religion, and their gods took human form. Also in amongst the Sumerians is where we think one of the first written languages developed. It wasn't the first. You also have the Egyptian hieroglyphics, and we think written language emerged amongst the Harappans and the Indus Valley civilization and amongst the Chinese, but it was one of the first languages. This right over here is an example of a cuneiform tablet. This is a cuneiform tablet written in the script cuneiform, developed by these ancient Sumerians. Now, when you talk about Mesopotamia, you'll talk about Sumerians, but we'll also talk about other civilizations that emerge. In particular, let me write them all down. You have the Sumerians. You'll also hear something called Akkadian. And as we'll see, Akkadian is both a language and an empire that will emerge. In Mesopotamia, over the roughly 3,000 years BCE, the two primary languages are Akkadian, which is considered a Semitic language. It's related to modern Semitic languages like Arabic and Hebrew. And the reason why they're called Semitic is because they're spoken, or they're purported to be spoken, by the descendants of Shem, who was Noah's son in the Hebrew Bible. So you have the language Akkadian, which is Semitic, and then you have the other language, which is Sumerian. And as we get into the 3rd millennium BCE, the Sumerians start to have a lot of interaction with Akkadian-speaking people. And Akkadian-speaking people are initially associated primarily with northern Mesopotamia. And we believe the first empire, true empire, perhaps the first empire in the world, emerged from Acadia, and it was called the Acadian Empire. And if we scroll down over here, we can see how the Acadian Empire spread. We believe.
Okay, now take a look here, guys. For those that want to do maps, here's some good examples of maps, and we will look at some other maps and help you find them if you want to do maps. But remember, everybody is doing today's CER. Now, hopefully you were paying attention right in the beginning. They were talking about some geographical features that impact civilization. They gave several examples that you can use in your CER. Let's continue.
I believe that the town of Akkad, which the Acadian Empire is named for, is someplace in this region right over here. And the first significant ruler who really spread that empire was Sargon, often referred to as Sargon the Great. And you can see that would have been established around the middle of the 23rd, or actually the 24th century BCE. So around 2350, you have Sargon establishing what might be the first dynastic empire in the world, the Acadian Empire. And he was able to take control of both northern and southern Mesopotamia. So even the Sumerians were under the control of the Akkadians. And as we'll see over time, you have a lot of mixing between the Akkadian language, the Sumerian language. Akkadian gets written in the cuneiform script. And starting at around this period, Sumerian starts to die as a spoken language, and Akkadian really becomes dominant. Now, the Akkadians rule for a little over 100 years. And then you have several other empires. It can get confusing. The way I've structured this timeline is this top line right over here is southern Mesopotamia, and this bottom line right over here is northern Mesopotamia. So this orange shows you where the Sumerians were reigning. Some people think that they might have been the first empire. This bottom line here, you can see the Akkadian speakers, but they were fragmented until you have Sargon the Great establishing the Akkadian Empire. Now you briefly then have a short-term Neo-Sumerian Empire, but the next significant empire that's often talked about when associated with Mesopotamia is the Babylonian Empire. So Babylonian Empire was centered at Babylon, right over here, and it really became a significant empire under the ruler Hammurabi. And Hammurabi is perhaps most known. You can see how he was able to spread the empire. The dark brown is what he had with his empire when he took rule, and the light brown is what he was able to spread it to. So once again, both north and south. And he's perhaps most famous for his famous Code of Hammurabi, which is depicted here. And it wasn't the first written code, but it was one of the earliest. And you could view it as almost like a proto-constitution. And it was based on things that the Sumerians had before, but they've even influenced things like biblical laws, things that come down to modern codes of law today. Now, after the Babylonians, the other significant empire that would have control over significant portions of Mesopotamia is the Assyrian Empire. And the Assyrian Empire is named for their, I guess you could say, their home base, the town of Assur. You can see it in this map here when we showed the Acadian Empire. And both the Babylonians and the Assyrians were Akkadian speaking. So at this point now, and as we get into the later Assyrian period, we'll start to have Aramaic be a more significant language, another Semitic language. But as you can see here, the Assyrian Empire at its peak controlled much of the modern day Middle East. Now, the Assyrian Empire would eventually collapse in the 7th century BCE and would be taken over by the Neo-Babylonian Empire. And I have a map of that right over here, which also controlled much of the modern Middle East. Probably the most famous ruler of the Neo-Babylonian Empire was Nebuchadnezzar II, from the Hebrew Bible, famous for taking the early Jewish people captive, the famous Babylonian captivity. But eventually they will be overthrown in the 6th century BCE by the Persians and Cyrus the Great. And that will actually be the end of the Babylonian captivity according to biblical accounts. But the big picture is that Mesopotamia is called the Cradle of Civilization for good reason. Not only do we have these technological and architectural advancements, their religion, their writing has influenced civilization since for the last 5, 6, 7,000 years. Well, I would say definitely the last 5,000 years. And a lot of these ideas that came out of Mesopotamia, like written codes of law and the technologies and all the rest, follow with us today.
All right, fantastic. That was a good one. Let's get started here. Okay, I'm not sure if we were recording or not, but now to write this essay, you can use this article that we're going to go look at right now, or the video, or your own previous knowledge. This article here also has a map. If you're making a map, you could use this one. You can add your own shapes, you can add your own key, you can make little figures in there, but this is not a bad map for you to use if you're going to make your own colored map instead of CERs. Look at this, the Cradle of Civilization. Right here, this talks about 2 rivers, Tigris, Euphrates River. Talks about what's in a name, land between 2 rivers. Comes down here, a complex history. There's a picture. You can get visual images there. Can you get evidence from this picture on how that would help a civilization grow? I think you could. Look at this right here. Geography and the growth of cities. I highly recommend coming into this paragraph, and you can find all the evidence you need to write your essay. Let's get busy. You have the article link. You just watched the video. I'm going to give you 20 minutes right now, basically the rest of class. The last 10 minutes of class, depending on where we got through on this, that'll be different for each class. But the last 5 to 10 minutes, we're going to come back on here. I'm going to go and browse through this top slide. What should I see? Do you have to write all this down? No. I'm going to leave this on the screen right now. So Angela, you can go change this. I can pause this video and everybody can see this. So you will have this on the screen. You do not have to write this down. These are your directions. State a claim. Give some specific features. Give some evidence and reasoning. Spell reasoning correctly. And then give another example, more specific details, another piece of evidence. And then in conclusion, wrap up reminding people about your claim. What's your claim? Geography impacts civilizations. All right, let's get started. Get this done. This is important for your science grade and also to stay on track. We'll look at these at the end of class So if you're going to leave Zoom, come back with 10 minutes left so we can check things out. All right, let's get started.